I never thought that one of the most ordinary walks in the park would become one of the scariest nights of my life, but it did. I live in a small suburban town, one of those kinds of towns where everyone is familiar with everyone else, and most people think nothing of being outside at any time of the day. It was a Friday night this summer, 2018. I had just finished a late shift at work, and I wanted to clear my head before going home. The local park was only a few blocks away from the apartment, and I used it a lot to jog or just walk when I needed to think. Tonight, it was quiet, too quiet, almost. The sun had probably set about an hour earlier, and even though the streetlights inside the park were on, the main walking path still felt shadowed under the trees. I remember thinking how peaceful it was as I entered, the smell of freshly cut grass lingering in the air. I wasn't expecting to see anyone. Most of the time on a weekday night, I'd be alone, or maybe see a few people walking dogs or a couple of teenagers sitting on the benches. I had my headphones on while listening to music at low volume, and I started walking along the main path. First, everything was normal. I saw a couple of dogs running in the distance and some people walking slowly, laughing quietly. It felt like it was going to be calm, almost therapeutic. But then I started noticing all these little things that made me feel uneasy, though at the time I tried to brush them off. The first thing I noticed was a guy sitting on a bench, not far from the path. He was wearing a hoodie, the hood pulled up over his head, even though it wasn't cold. He wasn't doing anything in particular, just sitting and staring straight ahead. I didn't think much of it at first. People sit on benches all the time, but as I passed, I realized he was looking at me. He didn't move when I walked by, didn't even shift his eyes from me. It made me uncomfortable, so I picked up my pace a little, telling myself he was probably harmless. I kept walking, trying to shake off the feeling, but then I heard footsteps behind me. I paused, and the footsteps stopped. I waited a few seconds and then continued to walk. They started, again, matching my pace perfectly. My heart started to beat faster, but again I told myself it was probably just someone else taking their own walk. Even so, the footsteps were too intentional, too synchronized with my steps. I decided to take a different path, one that led through a smaller section of the Shan Park with fewer lights. The main path was still ahead of me, but I wanted to cut through on a side trail that loops back toward the street. I figured that way I could get home more quickly and maybe avoid who was behind me. As I turned onto the trail, I noticed the man from the bench had stood up and was walking in the same direction. I thought maybe it was a coincidence, but something about the way he moved made me stop and stare. He wasn't jogging or taking a normal stroll. It was slow, almost like he was matching my pace without looking directly at me. I took out my phone and checked the time, then pretended to make a call, holding it up to my ear. The man didn't react. He didn't seem to care that I was looking at him. I forced myself to keep walking, trying not to panic. I thought maybe if I went faster, he'd eventually leave me alone. I broke into a light jog, and he did the same, keeping exactly the same distance behind me. My mind raced. Why was he following me? Was he dangerous? Should I run back the way I came? I made a decision to leave the park completely. There was a street exit just ahead that led back toward a well-lit neighborhood. I broke into a faster run, heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode out of my chest. The footsteps behind me sped up, matching mine perfectly. I didn't look back again. I just ran When I reached the street, I slowed down and finally risked glancing. Behind me, the man had stopped, at the edge of the park, standing at the shadows just inside the trees. I could see the hood over his head, the dark shape against the dimly lit path. He wasn't moving, just watching me. I don't know how long I stood there before I turned and ran home. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly unlock my apartment door. I thought that would be the end of it. I told myself it was probably just a creepy guy who liked to follow people. Maybe harmless. I kept imagining rational explanations. Maybe he was lonely. Maybe he was homeless. Maybe he just liked watching people walk. I tried to go back to my normal life, but I couldn't stop thinking about that night. A few nights later, I was back at the same park, this time during the day, trying to convince myself it was safe. I walked along the same path I had walked that night, scanning the area for anything unusual. Everything looked normal, and I started to relax a little, but then I noticed the same bench where I had first seen him. It was empty now, but someone had scratched something into the wood. I couldn't make out exactly what it said. It looked like letters carved hastily, some of them smeared as if whoever did it didn't want it to be legible. My stomach turned. I snapped a picture and walked away quickly. After that, I tried to avoid the park at night completely, but the worst part wasn't that. I felt unsafe. It was the feeling that someone knew I had been there, that someone was waiting even when I wasn't looking. I started noticing small things in the neighborhood too. Shadows moving in the corner of my eye. A figure across the street that would vanish when I looked directly. A car parked down the block that I didn't recognize. Lights turned on in houses when I walked past. I kept telling myself it was paranoia, that I was imagining things. But the memory of that night never left me. One evening, maybe 2 weeks later, I decided to go jogging again in the early evening, thinking it was safer than night time. I stayed on the main street, not going into the park at all. As I passed the edge of the park, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A figure was standing just inside the tree line, barely visible. It was the same height and build as the man from before, and the hood was up again. I froze in place. He didn't move, but I had this overwhelming feeling that he had been there for hours, just watching. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to move slowly, keeping my eyes on him. When I reached my car, I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove away, constantly glancing back in the rearview mirror. I never saw him again after that night. At least, not in the park. But sometimes, when I walk through the neighborhood, or even near my apartment, I get that same feeling that someone is watching me just beyond my line of sight. I've checked the park security cameras in the past, and nothing unusual shows up. No one was captured entering the park at night, and the areas I walked are supposed to be covered by cameras. I don't know if he was someone who knew how to avoid them, or if it was someone who had been living there without anyone noticing. The strangest part is that I never heard anything directly from him. No voice, no movement besides the footsteps, just that presence. I've told friends and family, but most of them dismiss it as paranoia. I know what I experienced, and I can't explain it. I've learned to avoid that part completely at night, and even in the day I stay on the main streets. But the memory sticks with me. Sometimes late at night, I find myself staring at the dark tree line where he stood, wondering if he's still there, waiting for someone else. I never go back, but a small, irrational part of me feels like he could still be there, even now, hiding just out of sight, watching anyone who dares to walk alone. I don't know why he picked me, or if it was random. I don't know if he was dangerous or just interested. All I know is that feeling of being followed, being watched without anyone seeing. It's something I'll never forget. Even writing this now, I feel a chill remembering the quiet way he moved, how he stayed just out of reach but always present. I still take my walks, but I make sure I'm never alone in the park after dark. And sometimes, when I'm home, I swear I hear the sound of footsteps outside, far enough away to be unnoticed, but close enough to remind me that I'm being watched. I tell myself it's probably nothing. I hope so, but I cannot seem to shake this feeling that somewhere out there he's still waiting, stalking me, watching as he was that, and night. I never called the police because there was no evidence or proof that anyone was there but me. I thought about it, but I couldn't even describe him clearly. Just a hoodie, a vague outline, and the feeling he knew my every move. The uncertainty is what haunts me. I had no idea who he was, why he was there, or if he was still around. Even now, walking past that park in the daytime makes me uneasy. Years later, sometimes when I drive past, I catch glimpses of a figure at the edge of the trees. I never know if it is real or just my imagination. I don't stop to find out. I just keep driving, praying I will never need to take that path on foot alone again. Back before phones and social media took over the planet, we actually had to go outside as kids. Maybe it's just where I live, but I don't see kids riding their bikes around or playing ding-dong, ditch, or doing any of those late-night troublesome kid activities anymore. But when I was a kid, and I'm talking anywhere from 9 to 17 years old, I was always outside with friends. At my childhood home, there was a park down the block from me that some of my friends and I would use as a hangout spot, especially at night, since our parents would get mad at us for being loud. The park was perfect because it had a small patch of woods on 3 sides, and then it faced the street on the 4th side, and across from the park was another small patch of woods. So basically, we didn't have any neighboring houses watching us or calling the cops on us for making too much noise when we were in the park. This happened when I was like 13, that age where we were riding bikes to get literally everywhere every day. I think that day in question was a Saturday, and we had ridden to a nearby pizza place a little earlier, then went back to my friend Tony's house, which was also not far from my house. The 6 of us were hanging out in his backyard until his mom came outside and yelled at him to either be quiet, send his friends home, go, or hang out somewhere else. By this point, 3 of our other friends decided to go home. Me, Tony, and our friend Rob decided to go ride to the park instead of calling it a night. It was only about a 5-minute bike ride, and there was something so refreshing about riding bikes at night. It felt easier and more relaxing. So the 3 of us got to the park. And to describe the park, besides its surroundings, the actual park had a small baseball field, a small bleacher stand, couple typical park benches, and a pretty decently sized playground with a swing set. We would always chill on the actual playground because it was a cool, elevated, hidden service to just hang out on. At some point when we were chilling on the playgrounds, Tony went, "Did you hear that?" And we all stopped talking for a few moments to listen. When nothing happened, Tony explained that he thought he heard a footstep or some kind of thump on the playground that wasn't us. So naturally kind of took a quick glance around the playgrounds and ultimately didn't see anyone. But probably a few minutes later, There was a sound that we all heard this time, and it did sound like some kind of thud emanating from somewhere on the physical playground itself. Now, we were slightly unsettled because we were almost certain someone else was there making that noise. So we took another peep, this time actually, getting up and walking around and even calling out, asking who was there. Of course, there was no response. So eventually we settled back, down on the playground. We both sat for another few minutes until we heard yet another sound. This time, it was a much more unsettling sound. It was the sound of a voice, a child's voice, and it came from inside the slide. One of those twirling metal slides you see at most typical playgrounds. I'm not going to lie, when we all heard it, we genuinely freaked out. Even though yes, we did hear some weird sounds. On the playground, we didn't hear anyone climbing onto the slide, and the thumping sounds definitely didn't come from the slide. So naturally walked over to the slide and listened. Then I said, "In there?" And is someone, a voice said back, "Hello." It was a child's voice. I want to say a boy. They sounded like a toddler. I was 90% sure they said, "Hello." My friends heard it too. We all gave each other these terrified looks. We had not heard anyone on the slide for the entire half hour we'd been there. I sat down on the slide. "Do you need help?" But there was no response now. In fact, we didn't hear the voice again. I had to assume there was a little kid stuck in there. So I climbed in and slid down. But as I slid down, expecting a child to appear around the corner the entire time, instead I made it to the bottom, only to find it was empty. I then did a scan around the ground level of the playground and the surrounding area, and there was not a soul in sight. My friends were just as shocked as I was. There was literally not a soul besides us around. And I'm telling you, it was not possible for someone to have run away that quickly, especially not a young child. We checked every possible place to hide, and there was no one. We were already beyond freaked out, but when we heard the same voice once again come from the slide, this time saying, "Catch me," we all bolted for our bikes. We pedaled faster than we ever had. Back to my house down the block. We regrouped and caught our breath in my backyard. We were trying to be quiet, though was likely asleep already, since my dad and he would get mad if we were loud outside. So we sat amongst ourselves talking about what just happened and any possible explanations. But things only got stranger when there was a knocking on the backyard gate. Yes, like someone was knocking as if asking permission to come in. I said, "Who is that?" Thinking maybe it was a family member, but it was an unfamiliar woman's voice. She said, "Hello," and then said, "Were you guys just at the park before?" We once again looked at each other nervously. There was this tiny crack in the gate where it met the fence that you could look through and see to the other side. So I peeked through it, and what I saw was this woman, middle-aged, standing on the other side with this big, wider face, and she, creepy grin on, was already looking right at me through the crack, like she knew to. I stepped away from the gate because it was such a disturbing sight. I backed away and said, "No, sorry." The woman replied back, "Are you sure?" And Tony replied to me, saying, "Woman," said, "Okay, thanks. No, anyway." We weren't. Stepped back toward the gate to see if she left, but she was still standing there, smiling and looking at me through the crack. We were freaked out so much that we went inside my house through the back door. We quietly hung out downstairs for a while, completely shook. That woman was terrifying. Everything about her. My friends were too, afraid to get their bikes and leave, so they just slept over and left that morning. We didn't. go back to that park for a long time after that. If we really wanted to explain it all away, we could go with the explanation that there was some kid who ran away from his mother and was playing at the park, and the mother was looking for her child. But it doesn't make sense because we rode home so fast that no one on foot would have been able to see where we went. Also, we know for a fact that we didn't see any kid running around the playground. So what the actual hell did we hear inside that slide? Who was that? Who was the woman? At this point, it's a really distant memory that will simply never be solved. This event happened less than 24 hours ago. The details are still incredibly vivid in my head. I'm not even sure how to classify the story, as it was so bizarre. It was the only time in my life that I have ever felt like I was actually in serious danger. Myself and a group of 5 friends were hanging out at a popular public park in my area called the Overlook because it had a great view of downtown and nearby universities. It was very late in the evening, around 11 o'clock. It was supposed to be just a chill rendezvous. We had no plans of doing anything other than hanging out on the park benches and talking. However, one of my friends said that he had Roman candles in his trunk and suggested we light them off. The Overlook is probably the worst place in the entire park to light fireworks. So I suggested we go to a more secluded part of the park called the Loop. The Loop is just a few minutes away from the Overlook, and most of it is surrounded by trees, so only people within that part of the park would be able to see what we were doing. All 6 of us piled into 2 separate cars and made our way over to the Loop. Although there was plenty of street parking within the Loop, we decided to park outside on a nearby street just in case anything went wrong. We started walking toward the actual Loop part, which is basically a huge cul-de-sac surrounded by woods. The driveway to the Loop is very long and winding, cutting through a thick tree line. You can't see anything within the Loop from outside because of the trees. We noticed a few cars parked in different spots, but we thought nothing of it as people walk in this park frequently. Still, it was strange for such a late hour. As we walked deeper into the Loop, we noticed several cars parked around the cul-de-sac with their lights off. Suddenly, a truck behind us started moving with its headlights off. It was facing the opposite direction toward the entrance of the Loop, but quickly made a U-turn and headed our direction. We all thought that was weird and hid behind some trees. The truck passed us slowly, then continued around the Loop and drove back toward the entrance, stopped suddenly, and made another U-turn. All of our stomachs dropped. The truck was small, probably only fitting 3 people. Yet there were 6, all over 6 feet tall. Still, we were scared and freaked out. For whatever reason, my friend thought this was the perfect time to light a Roman candle, and sparks flew our way. The truck immediately turned its headlights on and began driving slowly in our direction. We ran further into the tree line, which was on a downward slope, and hid behind more trees. However, the truck went over the curb and drove through the grass in our direction. Whoever was driving must have seen us run because they turned on their high beams and laid on the horn. We sprinted as fast as we could into the woods. These weren't paths people normally walked through. There were bushes and tall grass everywhere, making it hard to move. About 20 feet into the woods, we began hearing voices from the truck and saw more pairs of headlights turn on from the Loop. During the sprint, we had become separated. I was with 2 friends, and we didn't know where the other 3 were, but that wasn't our biggest concern. 2 men stepped out of the truck and sprinted down into the woods with flashlights. My friends and I lay flat on the ground, trying not to be seen. I managed to squeeze under a large bush, but my other two friends were still partially exposed. We were in sort of a sunken part of the woods with part of the loop directly above us. It was silent for a few minutes until we heard footsteps and saw flashlights from above. We didn't know if they could see us, but we were basically trapped. One group was searching from the front and another was searching from above. We didn't understand why they were so upset about fireworks. None of them had come close to any of their vehicles, and fireworks are legal in our state. All we could do was hide and hope they didn't find us. After about 15 minutes, we saw the truck pull out of the grass and back onto the street, then drive away. The other headlights disappeared, but we never saw the men who entered the woods come out. To make matters worse, one of my friends realized he lost his phone somewhere in the woods when he was running. Surprisingly, finding it wasn't hard, but getting out of the woods and back on the road leading to the loop was pitch black, and we couldn't use any flashlights or phones since we did not want to alert the men of our location. We huddled back up with one friend who had been hiding close by. He said one of the men ran right past him but didn't see him. However, he noticed the man was carrying what looked like a knife or some kind of manly weapon. When we heard this, we sprinted down the road toward the entrance. That's when we noticed the same truck as earlier, about 50 feet from the entrance. Fortunately, a dense patch of woods nearby allowed us to duck into it and move toward the exit. Somehow, whoever was in the truck managed to realize that we started moving because they immediately flipped on their high beams and pulled the truck right to the edge of the woods. At that point in time, we ran as hard as we could. The truck followed us along the road, but we quickly cut deeper into the woods. Finally, we reached a main road that led out of the loop. The truck did not follow beyond the entrance. We drove separately to get back to our cars down different back roads, hoping we weren't being followed. It wasn't until a few hours later that we heard from our other friends. They had managed to get away much faster because they just ran without hiding in most cases. I'm never going back to the loop. I don't know what those people wanted or why they made such an effort to hunt us in the woods, but I'm sure it wasn't good. At the time, it felt like it was taking an eternity, and I have never been as scared in my life. Truly, I had no idea what was going to happen.